Hello, everybody. Welcome to Joe the Lawyer. I'm your host, Joe Palmetto. Today, we're going to take a look at this article and some of the facts that flow from it. Shocking revelations. Could meth have fueled Nick Reiner's parents' brutal murder? There's been a lot of talk about Nick Reiner's mental state, his mental illness, schizophrenia. Now, let's take a closer look at whether or not drugs fueled this very tragic and murderous rampage. Now, if you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. That is a free way to support this show, support this channel. I'm looking to grow the channel right now. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Free ways. Also, raise your cup, your glass in the air. Sip with me. It tastes better when we sip together. Today, finishing off some Gatorade Zero that I had. Cheers. And whatever beverage you had, I'm not going to judge. Whatever beverage you like is your favorite beverage. Don't judge me for drinking Diet Coke and drinking Gatorade Zero. I won't judge you for whatever it is that you drink. All right, here we go. Shocking revelations. Could meth have fueled Nick Reiner's parents' brutal murder? And so I was reading this article. It starts out, Nick Reiner's horrifying attack on his parents might involve more than just mental illness. I think we all had that idea in mind, but there's some facts around this I want to take a look at. The latest episode of the Two Angry Men podcast suggests that methamphetamine could have played a significant role in the tragic events leading up to their deaths. In a recent segment, hosts Harvey and Mark Garagos explored the drug culture surrounding Exposition Park in downtown Los Angeles, where Nick was arrested. They interviewed locals about their experiences with the area's rampant substance abuse. One individual boldly claimed Exposition Park is a drug den where users can get anything they want, including meth. This eyewitness also noted that Nick seemed familiar. The details surrounding the murders of Rob and Michelle Riener are chilling. Their deaths have left medical professionals and law enforcement stunned by the brutality of the crime, described as sheer carnage. And give me 1 second here. I think I missed a part of this article. Wait a minute. Oh, wait, no. I got to scroll down. Yeah, such a weird article. Dr. Drew joined the podcast to analyze the violence, noting the markings of a meth murder are evident here. So I'm going to take a look at that as well. What exactly is a meth murder? Mark concurred, highlighting recon from the jail where Nick is being held, describing him as almost childlike, lacking any understanding of why he is incarcerated. And we talked about that previously. Many people think he may be faking. Maybe it's part of the mental illness. TMZ previously reported Nick had managed his schizoaffective disorder with medication until about a month prior to the killings. When he expressed concern about gaining weight from the drugs, his doctors adjusted his treatment plan, leading to a downward spiral that may have culminated in this tragic outcome. As the investigation continues, the question remains, how much influence did meth have in this unthinkable act? So we're gonna take a look at some information on that. Might not have fueled it, but they certainly didn't help. That's for sure. That looks awful. Purified water is, hey, Brooke, amen. I'm drinking a lot of that too. So, methamphetamines are the worst. Well, we'll get into that. But first, I want to take a look at where Nick Reiner was arrested. So Nick Reiner was arrested on Sunday night, December 14th, 2025, the same day his parents were found dead in their Brentwood, Los Angeles home. The murders allegedly occurred in the early morning hours, and Nick was apprehended in the Exposition Park area, approximately 15 miles away. Now, I've heard of Skid Row. I've admittedly never been to Los Angeles. Tell me about Exposition Park. So when you go to the Wikipedia page, it seems like a really pleasant place. Exposition Park is a neighborhood in the south region of LA. It's home to Exposition Park, which includes the LA Memorial Coliseum, BMO Stadium, Exposition Rose Garden, California African American Museum, has a science center, natural history museum. So it doesn't really sound to me like a residential area. According to the Mapping LA project of the LA Times, Exposition Park, 1.85 square mile neighborhood, is flanked by Adams Normandy on the north, University Park, historic South Central on the east, Vermont Square on the south, Jefferson Park and Limer Park on the west. Now, I've heard of South Central LA, and I've heard that that's a place, that's a rough place as far as my knowledge is concerned. And you scroll down here, and one interesting thing about the Wikipedia page, let me see here real quick if I can find it, is the population density. So this is very interesting. A total of 31,062 residents counted in its 1.85 square miles, including the parkland as well as LA Coliseum, an average of 16,000 people per square mile, among the highest population densities for both the city and the country. By 2008, the population had increased to 33,458, the city had estimated. So that would make sense, right? When it comes to crime, okay, places that are especially dense by population tend to not always, but tend to be centers where crime can occur. Now, we're looking at Exposition Park here, and you can see down in the bottom corner here, if you can see my mouse, is the LA Memorial Coliseum, Park Rose Garden. And this is where all those things that the Wikipedia article talks about. But I'm assuming what we're seeing here is the neighborhood of Exposition Park. And you can see there's a bunch of streets that just look racked and stacked. And that type of living environment, I think, can be conducive to crime. So, I continued to do a little bit of research on Exposition Park and if whether or not it was known for methamphetamine or not. Exposition Park in LA has a complex reputation with crime rates that are generally higher than the city average, which is probably pretty rough when you're comparing it to the rest of Los Angeles, and it is pretty bad, leading to a C+ crime grade. It is not typically cited as a primary open-air methamphetamine hotspot in the same way some other areas of LA are described. And I was reading about MacArthur Park. Wow, MacArthur Park is just, they call it it's like open fentanyl zombies everywhere. It does struggle with elevated crime levels, including robbery, assault, and occasional violent incidents in the immediate vicinity of its museums and the USC campus. And that's kind of sad that it's, right by a campus and it's known for high crime. Hello, Mary. Thank you for stopping in. Scott, my Diet Coke friend from London. Thank you very much. Shielding single malt Scotch whiskey from Islay. That sounds tremendous. Zephiel. That sounds tremendous. The only other substances make someone act like that. Maybe PCP, which is not common these days, and synthetics. Those synthetics can be something else. Bath salts. Lots of condos, apartments, and stuff, I'm guessing. Can't see the mouse. Okay. Sorry, it's hard for me to describe. I guess, hold on a second. So this is my right, which would be the center of the screen. But I think you're left. Anyway, just follow my words. Synthetic drugs are crazy in how they're made, not even talking about how they interact in people. Yeah, absolutely. So, crime profile. The neighborhood of Exposition Park has higher than average crime compared to other parts of Los Angeles. Violent crime, including robberies and assault with a weapon, is present. Recent incidents, and this is funny, like this popped up as soon as I started to talk about that's MacArthur Park. But as soon as I started to talk about Exposition Park, this is from February 6, 2026, Los Angeles police fatally shoot man outside of California Science Center in Exposition Park. So there's crime there, and there's crime that happened just a few days ago. Day versus night. While often considered safe during the day due to tourists and museum visitors, the surrounding area is often described as feeling sketchy or unsafe at night. Transient population. Here we go. The park and surrounding areas have been affected by the city's homelessness crisis, with reports of encampments and safety concerns. Drug reputation. While some reports focus on MacArthur Park as a drug-ridden area for fentanyl and methamphetamine, Exposition Park is often mentioned in the context of general crime and public safety issues rather than specifically as a major hub for meth production. Fair enough. However, drug-related crimes and theft are present in the wider surrounding areas of South Central and West Lake. So what you have here is a park which appears to be a fairly large park and a lot of open public places right next to some neighborhoods that are known very much for their drug and crime activity. And then the Exposition Park neighborhood has all these people packed right into it. So it really does sound like the type of place that would be a breeding ground for crime. Now, I don't live in LA. I can't speak personally to what it's like there. University impact. The presence of the University of Southern California means the area has high security presence in some spots, but it also experiences violent crime on its edges, which sometimes spills into Exposition Park. Residents often recommend not walking alone at night, being aware of surroundings, and not leaving valuables in cars. Well, that sounds like a pretty high crime area to me. My best comparison to that is I had a friend in Philadelphia who went to Temple University. I visited out there a few times, and for those of you who know, and those of you who don't know, Temple University is located in North Philly. And North Philly is kind of, it's a pretty rough area. And, one thing about Pittsburgh is, I've done a lot of traveling, but I don't normally travel to rough areas, right? And Pittsburgh's bad neighborhoods aren't really that big. So when I went and I saw North Philly, I was like, wow. I was like, this is a whole nother world compared to Pittsburgh. You could fit the city of Pittsburgh inside some of the bad areas in Philadelphia. And I'm assuming Los Angeles is a lot like that. It's just this sprawling metropolis. And so this Exposition Park, while what we're seeing here says it's not necessarily super bad, it's pretty bad. Exposition Park, Los Angeles, California, crime score C+, higher than average crime. It's like vehicle theft leads the way, but you got assaults, robberies, burglaries. And again, like I said, as soon as I kind of jumped onto this, I saw here, Los Angeles police fatally shoot man outside a California Science Center in Exposition Park. LA police fatally shot a man who was allegedly armed with an air rifle outside of the California Science Center in Exposition Park on Thursday morning. It happened around 9:30 a.m. near State Street and Figueroa Street, so bright and early. Police said in a news release shared Friday. Police said a motorcycle officer was flagged down by LA Fire Department personnel regarding a man with a rifle. The officer requested additional police resources. Uniformed officers from multiple divisions responded to the request and arrived at the scene. They contacted the suspect, 39-year-old Holman Gomez, as he was walking along the State Drive. Police claim he sat on a concrete bench while they spoke with him, and then at one point he stood and pointed a rifle in their direction, which prompted officers to open fire. Gomez was struck by gunfire and pronounced dead at the scene. An air rifle was discovered at the scene and booked as evidence. Well, the police don't know in that moment what it is you're raising. So, very much, too bad. It's sad, it's tragic, but you can't be pointing an air rifle at people, you know what I mean? So the other part of this that was interesting to me was what Dr. what's his name said about a meth murder, Dr. Drew. So, this is something that I haven't really looked into, but it's pretty fascinating, and I think it's worth looking into. Doctors in areas like this get weekly write-ups because they don't know how to treat them, can't screen for them either. Synthetic drugs. Yeah, and these synthetic drugs, they're easy to hide, so they end up in the jails a lot. And I see like kratom and a bunch of other stuff in the jails, on the prisons all the time. So, meth murders. So let's take a look at this. Methamphetamine related murders. Excuse me, I got a little bit of nasal buildup. Methamphetamine related murders often involve extreme violence, hallucinations, and paranoia induced by the drug, leading to cases of homicide driven by addiction or intoxication. High-profile incidents include the 1993 courtroom killing of a child molester by a mother under the influence. Oh no, oh no. When it does this, I cannot get out of it. Hang on a second, guys. When my computer does that, I have the hardest time getting out of it. Let's get to regular size here. Okay. Okay, and looks like I get a little different. I get a bit of a different mix whenever I do that. Based on your search for meth murder of Shad Tyrion. Come on. So, Kristen Rossum, Wikipedia, toxicologist who murdered her husband in 2000 using fentanyl while struggling with methamphetamine addiction. Let's do the deeper dive here, because I want to get back. I was right into a perfect spot there. Psychosis and violence. Chronic meth use can lead to methamphetamine. This state-induced psychosis, characterized by extreme paranoia and hallucinations, this state can cause users to view family as strangers or threats, leading to unprovoked, brutal attacks. What does that sound like? It sounds exactly like the Nick Riener murders. Trafficking and disputes. Murders are frequently linked to the drug trade, often involving disputes over missing money, lost drug packages, or territory. We don't have that going on here. In some jurisdictions, individuals can face murder or manslaughter charges if their meth use results in a stillborn birth or death of a child from accidental exposure. So let's look at some of these cases. Taylor Shabiznes, convicted of a gruesome meth-fueled murder and dismemberment in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The Speed Freak Killers, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine, were a serial killer duo in California named for their habitual meth use. Derek Dearman, sentenced to death for a meth-induced massacre of 5 people in Alabama. Matthew Shepard, while widely known as a hate crime, some investigative reports and books, such as the Laramie Project, suggest the motive may have been linked to a meth-related drug deal gone wrong. Attorneys sometimes argue that extreme meth intoxication prevents a defendant from forming the specific intent required for first-degree murder. So, just pretty wild here. Hold on show me more on meth murders and their gruesomeness. What a fun Google thing to put in. Methamphetamine use is strongly linked, here we go, to extremely violent and often gruesome crimes due to the severe psychological effects of the drug. Dismemberment and mutilation, child murders, stabbing, and post-mortem injury. A woman was found with over 100 stab wounds, no skin, missing breast, which was found in a toilet. It's just terrible. Filicide. Mothers have been involved in the stabbing deaths of their newborns. Mass homicides. So I have to be honest with you, I never really knew of the close link between meth and basically gruesome or terrifying murders. And with the things that Nick Riener did to his parents, this starts to make much more sense here. And I think it'll be interesting throughout the case to see if the police obtained the blood result shortly after he was arrested. Like, are we gonna get a toxicology report on what exactly was in Nick's system? In this, let's see this one here. 23-year-old Fresno woman fatally shot her 2 toddlers and a cousin, critically wounded her husband, then turned the gun on herself. Immediately suspected methamphetamine abuse and what otherwise was inexplicable carnage. And I guess, the common sense link here is that with methamphetamine, right? We commonly associate it with, I think, hallucinations, and then not sleeping for days on end, and then some kind of like amphetamine, crazy, wild, energy. And when you take that into account, it's like this supercharged ADHD. It starts to make a little bit of sense, right? Because ADHD, methamphetamine, it's like these repeat behaviors. So it's like if it pushes somebody to kill, whereas I hate to say this, but like a sober killer may stab or shoot someone once. When the person's on meth, okay, they're going to stab or shoot them over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that makes sense when they talk about like the post-mortem injuries and the injuries to the dead body. It's just like this over and over manic type of behavior. So, what were these guys on this podcast talking about? Well, you put you connect a couple of dots here, right? First of all, Nick has a history of drug and methamphetamine use. Plus, he was he almost started a fight with that one comedian, Bill Hader, that very night when he was at at Conan O'Brien's party. So that's erratic behavior. The murders occur in the morning. They have the markings of a meth murder, which are the slicing of the throat and the hundreds of stab wounds, which is that repetitive sort of injury. And likely a lot of it was done after they were already, the individuals, the parents were already dead. And then later on that night, he's captured at this park that appears to be, while not as bad as much of LA or many areas in LA, like, I don't know, Skid Row or this, what's it called? McCormick Park, or what was it called? MacArthur Park. All those dots point to a meth murder. And that's what Dr. Drew said. He probably knows more on this subject than me. But I think it's very interesting. I think it's something that the prosecution is certainly going to explore, because no matter how many expert witnesses he gets in there, if people find out that he was on meth when this occurred, he's in a lot of trouble. He is in a lot of trouble. And they might be less likely to find him mentally insane or cut him any type of slack, because voluntary intoxication of a substance, while it does play on your mental state, your ability to form intent, which is a critical element of most crimes, when you voluntarily intoxicate yourself, you don't get the benefit of arguing that you couldn't form the intent. The law just ignores it when you are under the influence of strong drugs or alcohol. So, I don't think Nick would succeed on a voluntary intoxication via methamphetamine. It'd be interesting. Another interesting part here will be the medical records in his treatment when he was taken into jail, right? Did he have to detox for a couple of days? Was he put into a detox or medical unit? I believe he was under suicide watch, but was he being treated for for drug withdrawal? All of these are going to be interesting questions that will be answered, or will at least be attempted to be answered throughout the course of the trial. So, I think this is an interesting avenue to explore. There's a lot of facts here in Nick's case, a lot of facts that lead sort of both ways, right? I mean, the drug use, his erratic behavior, all the kind of times he hated on his parents, make this look like an intentional, perhaps even drug-fueled murder. And then you have the schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, the temporary insanity element, the full insanity element. This case is going to be like it's going to be an educational seminar on what drugs do to a person's mind and what mental illness does to a person's mind. But I have to say, I lean more towards, once I read more about how, like, meth murders, how people on meth commit murders, I leaned more into that camp. So it's going to be very interesting. So let me go to the chat here. Doctors get weekly write-up. People put them in long-term psych wards. The Matt Shepard case. I'm really not familiar with that, Brooke, that case at all. But it sounds interesting. Blood or hair, he was arrested the same day. Most jails, judge has to order a drug screen or it doesn't happen. Yeah, if it's not, sometimes if it's self-reported, the jails will take action. I doubt, though, you're right, I doubt that a urine screen was taken in this particular case if it wasn't specifically ordered. That's true in Pennsylvania as well. But an interesting angle here would be, he likely talked to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and received some sort of treatment. I believe he was on suicide watch early on. And so there are medical records and probably interviews, and it would be interesting to see. Now, those are likely going to rely on Nick's own self-reporting, right? But it could be possible that he admitted that he was on drugs when speaking to these professionals. And, that may not always come up in a case, but if his lawyers are going to be citing, if his lawyers are going to be using mental health as a defense, then the prosecution's likely going to be able to get their hands on that and may be able to use it if there's information that leads to him possibly being on meth. But the meth murder modus operandi here is very interesting. If they do get wind that he was on meth, they could probably bring in some experts to talk about that, the way in which people on meth commit murders. And that could really damage his chances of his insanity defense. It's funny how Alan Jackson was like, Mr. Riener will be found not guilty under the laws of the state of California. I think this is probably going to be a closer case. I do think, that's his best route, and I think he has a shot with that. And who knows, like, if he can establish that, maybe they'll even take a plea along those lines. But that's really going to depend, in my opinion, upon the family and upon how much of a taste they have for something like that. But just truly fascinating take here. History of methamphetamine use, the signature of the murders themselves look like a meth murder, and then he's found at a park where there's lots of drug use. And, it just makes sense with his history, etc. So we will continue to monitor the Nick Riener case, see what happens. Got a couple live viewers here. So if anybody wants to hit me with some questions or bring up some topics, we got some time. Happy to talk to you guys about anything else. If the glove doesn't fit, you can't convict. You guys know the story of we all know the story of the glove, right? OJ's putting on a glove. He's putting on a glove over another glove, right? Because his lawyers convinced the prosecutors and the DAs he had to put this glove on, and then he tried to put another glove on over it. Like, the prosecutors on that case were just not that good. But I have to tell you, speaking about OJ, I've been reading a lot about F. Lee Bailey just to kind of learn for my own use in court, his cross examination and trial techniques. And I watched an interview with F. Lee Bailey, and I do recall when I was, I think, 10 years old was the OJ case, and it was all over TV, and I didn't really pay attention, but my parents watched the news every night, and I remember walking through the living room, or I'd be sitting there, playing with my toys or whatever, and this OJ thing was on constantly. And I remember when they acquitted him, and it was a big deal. But F. Lee Bailey said something interesting about OJ, and he said that there was testimony. There was testimony that, and I haven't watched any of the documentaries either, but F. Lee Bailey said during the trial there was testimony that there was another individual, like an unknown individual, who was seen at the house. They had some witness come in and testify that around the time of the homicides, or maybe shortly before, that there was an unknown individual who was spotted at the house. And F. Lee Bailey was like, he said he thought that was actually the most important piece of evidence that led to the acquittal. So and first of all, we watch the media, so the media is all caught up in the glove, blah, blah, blah. And, these cross-examinations and the racist cop, right? And these police didn't do their jobs, and this police officer had a history of racism, and just trying to pin this on OJ. All those things in the media. But F. Lee Bailey, one of the trial attorneys, he thought the most important piece of evidence was this witness who said there was somebody else there. And I tend to agree with him, and that's very true. Is sometimes the most tantalizing evidence in a case, what at least what appears to be, is not the most important evidence, or the type of evidence that ultimately turns the jury. That's why I like to interview all my jurors after a jury trial. Some attorneys don't. I think most attorneys do. You have to be Johnny on the spot, though, which is kind of tough. Like, especially if your client just lost, they're going to want to talk to you. And if you want to interview the jurors, you basically have to run out of the courtroom to find them. So you have to make a decision between interviewing the jurors or staying and consoling and speaking to your client. And so I had one trial that, well, let me put it this way: the trials that have not always gone my way. And I want to say one thing about my jury trials: I've never outright lost a jury trial on all counts. I mean, I've sort of lost jury trials, but I've always had my clients acquitted of at least some counts, and almost always at least the top count. But when you win a case, when you win and everybody's in a good mood, it's easier for me to run out and go and talk to the jurors. But when it doesn't quite go our way, then my client's sitting there and has got all these questions, and they're down and this and that, and I want to sit there and console them, and I miss the jurors. So I tend to interview the jurors on the cases that I win more often than the cases that I lose. And again, they will often tell you things that just really didn't even occur to you. I remember I did this DUI which actually was declared a mistrial, and then I did a jury trial. It was a mistrial with the jury, and then we went to a judge trial, and I won the judge trial, the bench trial. And I had this engineer, and the case involved a car getting flipped over. Okay, and essentially the defense's story was that the individual was driving at presumably a safe speed. A deer came, and then he swerved off the road and flipped the car. Well, this engineer who voted to convict, I talked to him afterwards, and he was like, the only, is what he says to me. He goes, the only way that car could have flipped like that is if he was driving at a very high rate of speed, and that made him think that essentially my client was lying and that he was intoxicated and that he was speeding when it happened. And I don't think I'm assuming he shared it with the rest of the jurors. I still had the jurors tied up, right? I still managed to get a hung jury. But he said that, and I was like, well, I didn't exactly have an engineer analyze this DUI case, but I ended up having that because there was an engineer on the jury. So it's always interesting. Clients will sometimes jurors will think about things that the attorneys don't always notice, right? Like, as an attorney, we think we have all these really good issues or points that we point out in our case, but I think that's why it's important to try to focus on the important stuff, but to also kind of throw a lot of these things at a jury, because you don't always know which part is going to be the most persuasive. So, it's interesting thing about, the OJ case, etc. It's hard to say which facts a jury's going to really lock onto. I'm a baby, Brooke. I guess 43. Yeah, if I'm a baby at 43, I guess so. We got to watch that trial in class under current events. Yeah, I heard that about OJ. They didn't play it in my school. I was in 5th grade, I think. But I remember it being on TV every day. There's a book about her dog, which was Nikita, that was at the crime scene. The breed is basically like a loaded handgun if it doesn't know the person and family is getting attacked. That's a good point, too, Zephiah. Very good point. My kid got summoned for jury duty. I was cracking up. Hey, send your kid in and then get the story afterwards. It's a really great experience. And, there's a lot of people in law school, like, I've heard lawyers, they'll ask you, why did you go to law school or this and that? And a lot of people will say, well, I got picked for jury duty. I went to jury duty and it was so fascinating and interesting. I wanted to learn more, and then they end up being a lawyer. They end up being a paralegal. It's certainly an experience. What sort of school did that engineer go to? I've seen vehicles flipped easily. Some of those road barriers are designed to flip a car versus incoming traffic. Yeah, good question. I don't know, Zephiel, but I do remember that conversation. And he voted to convict my client. That's what he said to me. So I was working in Ithaca, New York, and the jury figured out the blood evidence in a murder case that the lawyers didn't. Exactly. And exactly, like, that's why it's so fascinating to go and interview the jurors afterwards. I remember I did this one trial, and I have like a plaid suit, and I'm trying to remember, like, this one juror wore plaid one day, and then I wore my plaid suit the next day. And then after the trial, she was like, "Did you wear that plaid suit to try to influence me because I wore plaid the day before?" And I was like, I gotta be honest with you, I didn't recall at all what you were wearing. I'm looking at 12 people and have 100 other things in my mind. It's like, no, it's just, that's one of my favorite suits. And the trial was, I think we went for 2 days or 3 days. And I was like, so I just wore one of my favorite suits, which was pretty funny. Jury figured, my cousin is the DA. Yeah. The jury, or, lawyers going, like, especially in criminal law, lawyers, first of all, you don't have the same sort of discovery exchange that occurs in a civil case, right? Where you get to do written interrogatories and written admissions and requests for production and depositions where you interview all the witnesses before the trial. So in a civil case, if you get to interview all the witnesses, you're basically going to know exactly what's going to be said at a trial. You don't have that opportunity in criminal cases. You have the physical evidence, the video, the written documents, but at least in Pennsylvania, you don't get to interview the witnesses beforehand. Plus, the DAs are incredibly busy, so they're learning and building their case sometimes a week before trial. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen the police officer leading that a district attorney's best friend is a really involved and experienced police officer, because those officers will run the case. They'll tell the DA, hey, ask this question, or you need to bring up this evidence. I've seen it a million times. Now, I've also seen the DAs who are incredibly prepared, and they put every detail together, and they know the case inside and out. But like I said, I've also taken advantage of DAs who are not, because I try to be more prepared. I'm not always, incredibly prepared, but I would say on the average, I probably have a better understanding of the case than the DAs do. Although it's not always true. I've seen some DAs who were just impeccably prepared. But yeah, the DA may not even have the entire theory of the case until we're actively in the trial. So it's very interesting. And again, like sometimes, like one time we did this trial. So there was one of the first trials I did, and I only assisted another attorney. Okay, and this case ended up being basically this case. The client did get convicted of everything. Okay, now I was assisting the lead attorney. I was not the lead attorney on the case. I've never, still to this day, as the lead attorney on a case, had a client convicted of all charges. Never had it happen. Always beat the top charge at least. Anyway, in this particular case, there was a really weird piece of video evidence that the defense, we didn't decide to put it into evidence until we had kind of thought that it wasn't going our way. So we put this video into evidence, and the jurors' faces were just like, it was like they were watching the moon landing. They were just like enthralled. And they requested to watch the video like over and over and over again. And it just had this huge impact on them. And that's one where I didn't ask the jurors, but I always think back to that and I'm like, I want to know why they want, because I didn't even know how this video was going to hit, right? But I wanted to know why they wanted to see it and then exactly how it hit them. But I didn't have that opportunity on that particular case. Like I said, I assisted on the trial. I was there when the verdict was read. But it was, I recall now, this was during COVID. This was in 2020. And we just... basically, the jurors didn't stick around to be interviewed. That's what happened. So, very interesting. If your client didn't hurt someone or have a big history, similar crimes, I'd never convict. Not that I'd let a judge know that. Well, Zeph, here's the thing. The jury's not going to know about their history of crimes, but you will know whether or not you thought they hurt someone. No, my kid shouldn't sit on a jury when family being the DA. Well, that's true. Good point, Brooke. Very good point. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. We're going to continue to watch the Nick Riener case. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Juris, can I get a copy to take? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Can they get a copy of the video to take home? I know, right? I know. I think they have to, like, destroy all their notes and stuff, too. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Joe Pometto, Joe the Lawyer. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. You got a real live practicing criminal defense attorney who's reporting and analyzing the biggest cases in criminal defense across our country. Thank you, everybody, and have a terrific day. Brooks FIL, thank you guys for tuning in.